Sound directly shapes the movement, depth, and emotional quality of visual patterns. The boundary between clothing and body collapses, making the person feel as if they are removing layers of skin. The person merges into the wallpaper and enters the tiny imagined world living inside it. An ordinary bathroom door becomes a historical portal that seems capable of transporting the person to another era. The person cannot judge the distance of cars while crossing the road, turning ordinary traffic into danger. The green shag carpet transforms into a living sea of worms, consuming the person's feet. Musical notes feel like animated presences moving through space rather than abstract sounds. Music is felt as a living force that travels from the speakers into the head and settles physically in the spine. The person does not merely hear music, but feels they exist inside the song. Dropping a penny becomes fascinating because its tiny vibration seems to pulse through the body. An ordinary bottle begins to appear alive, breathing like an animated object. The idea that time can be measured by numbers becomes nonsensical. Music becomes spatially visible or present in front of the person, rather than merely heard. Sitting in a parked vehicle becomes an imagined act of driving through a desert. The feeling that focused attention might allow them to walk through a solid bathroom door. During intimacy, the partner's body changes colors, textures, and identities. Every part of the room contains the same central point, no matter where the person looks. Seeing through the partner's skin into the inner workings of her body. Music controls every aspect of perception, emotion, movement, and sensory reality. Different colored lights create distinct emotional atmospheres, with purple feeling warm and euphoric, while blue feels cool and liberating.
Objects appear to zoom in or zoom out, depending on attention, as if visual perspective can be consciously adjusted. Psychedelic patterns appear built into architecture and the earth itself, not overlaid on top of reality. Visual geometry feels like the world's hidden structure has been revealed rather than hallucinated. The person can recognize one's reflection visually, but conceptualizes the body as a large ape rather than a human. Random tasks feel like supernatural commands that must be completed to survive or escape. Ordinary people's faces morph into disturbing forms, turning the social world hostile. Awareness jumps between rooms and moments, as if reality is being edited like a television scene. Past events, present moments, and imagined futures cut into each other until time loses sequence.
The person believes specific, repeated actions and room arrangements can break them out of a time loop. A racing heart becomes interpreted as possible cardiac arrest, intensifying fear of death. shadows become humanoid extraterrestrial figures, watching and surrounding the person. The person frames disruptive people as lower forms of being that can invade sacred altered states. The mind holds two identities at once, a terrified human and a dinosaur-like creature. Everything develops hard visual outlines that create fear simply through their sharpness. Putting on a blazer and tie makes the person feel like a ruined writer in a cheap motel room. A small weed is perceived as a hostile being that sees the person's worthlessness and wants to destroy them. The frightened person worries he may have fainted at the rave, and that the hotel scene is only a time-dilated hallucination. The mind alternates between amazing revelations and terrifying realizations. Talking to strangers becomes difficult because their faces begin looking creepy, distorted, and melting. The person becomes unsure of where they are, who they are, and what is happening. The person has no idea what their personality is and cannot access a stable self-description. A spontaneous inner system repeatedly reframes frightening visions before conscious fear can fully form. The person visually appears as multicolored slime running down a wall. Multi-toothed, spiky, many-eyed monsters are diffused by being kissed rather than resisted. Extreme terror flips into joy so quickly that the same trip feels both traumatic and ecstatic. Thorn scratches are enjoyed because the sting makes the body feel intensely alive. Warm water becomes a soothing container where terror transforms into joy, sadness, self-reflection, and relief. Trees, moon, and stars outside the window pulse as if quietly communicating with each other. The tree actively invites the person to climb back into its branches as a return to childhood contact. The tree and the person share a memory field built from years of childhood climbing and play. A familiar childhood tree becomes a living presence that remembers the person's past. The person and the tree become one, collapsing the boundary between human consciousness and tree being. The tree allows the person to briefly experience what it is like to live as a tree. The experience teaches that the trip cannot be controlled directly and must be ridden through like a wave. Gathering sticks and building a fire gives the group a sudden shared purpose and restores direction. The body feels like liquid, flowing downward into the earth. The body seems to disappear, leaving only the tree, road, and surrounding life as the field of experience. A person with no religious habit spontaneously enters a prayer posture without consciously choosing it. Time disappears during the peak, and anxiety vanishes because there is no future to fear. Beneath the fear, disgust, craving, and instability, the person finds a brutally honest version of the self. Astrological signs appear as recurring identity modes that every person inhabits again and again. Both partners feel they have lived the exact same moment together before, again and again. Later intimacy feels like both people are merging into one shared consciousness. A medieval knight, a future soldier, and the narrator all appear to be tripping and hallucinating each other across time. Separate people from different historical periods seem aware of one another through the shared LSD state. The trip teaches that wisdom begins when the need to know everything gives way to listening. Emotional and psychological barriers between two friends seem to dissolve. The person briefly lives as objects and feels their lives before returning to human identity. A single moment feels large enough to contain entire lives. Emotions stop feeling merely personal and become abstract, conceptual forms. Memories can be replayed, inhabited, analyzed, and watched as if they are active realities. The self is understood as a rare living combination of matter that should not be wasted on addiction. Even visionary material fails to become fruitful insight because the emotional component is missing. Humans are imagined as buds connected to the sky and air like parts of one living rosebush. The blue sky expands into human lungs, revealing breathing as direct connection to the atmosphere. A mycelial network wraps around the globe and connects all beings, including the person. The self repeatedly reforms into impossible objects, creatures, perspectives, and abstract forms. Everything seen, heard, smelled, and felt becomes part of the self, creating a direct unity with nature. The person loses individuality and repeatedly arrives at the conclusion that everything exists as one structure. The more the person dissects existence, the more every detail reduces to the same single answer: oneness. Galaxies, stars, and cosmic structures are understood as matter, gathering like leaves and moss in moving water. Energy moving through the body becomes an astral, sexual revelation connected to the universe itself. God is felt as a loving and protective force that produces bodily relief and emotional safety. LSD is personified as a strange female presence the narrator may visit again when the time is right. The person sees their own soul resting in a distant shrine, surrounded by beautiful landscapes. The person realizes that the universe is made not of atoms, but of gathered eyes, forming cosmic murals. Ego death appears as a threshold, where crossing it would mean giving up everything that makes the person I. The hidden unity of consciousness appears as a breathing entanglement of pipelines, worm-like structures, and flowing energy. The self melts into a field of fractals, music, and non-individual consciousness. Human history appears as a repeated descent into darkness and return into eternity. the person becomes convinced that every being will eventually experience every human life. Everything seems perfect, meaningful, and connected by hidden reasons. The person feels able to experience life as many copies of the self, each living in its own parallel time stream. Time becomes not one flow, but multiple conceptual timelines experienced from inside different selves. The attempt to weigh pros and cons collapses into the realization that opposing arguments form a circle. Eating and being eaten are understood as neutral redistribution of atoms across living forms. Zooming out beyond the universe ends inside an eye, then begins again in a recursive cosmic loop. The sense of I disappears when consciousness can no longer organize itself into a stable perspective. Reality appears to recursively fold back upon itself until ordinary comprehension fails. The experience culminates in the clear or white light, a classic mystical state associated with ego death.